Hey everyone, I'm Dan Jurek, joined by Dylan Grenz, and welcome back to the Rain Delay podcast. We just wrapped up the 2025 MLB Draft, and as anticipated, it was a big year for the Pacific Northwest, from the high school ranks all the way through college prospects. So in this episode, we'll be going over the top selections as well as guys that were taken later on in day two, kind of recapping some of the things we saw and some of the trends that played out throughout the course of the draft, as well as going back and looking at some of the content, evaluations, and video that we've had on some of these players from their very early days all the way up into the draft. So Dylan, I know you were locked in from start to finish with the draft, doing a ton on social media, pumping a bunch of information out there. Give us a quick little breakdown of just how the numbers played out in terms of total volume of players, from the area, and the breakdown of the high school guys versus the college guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a banner year for the Pacific Northwest. In terms of the MLB draft, 6 total players across Oregon and Washington that were high schoolers got drafted in this 2025 draft, as well as 11 other players out of college got drafted that played their high school baseball in Washington and Oregon. So super excited for all those guys and excited to get into the breakdowns of these players.
Yeah, and we were running an event during day two. We were on the road during day one. I know you were pretty much in a command center throughout, covering the draft and having a little bit more background on guys. Obviously, pretty much most of all the high school guys that got picked, you have seen at some point, and obviously you have familiarity with the college game of some of those players as well. So kind of like, what was that process for you, or what did you kind of think throughout the course of the whole draft in terms of some of the trends you saw, or some of the things, whether it was a rush of high school shortstops or whether it was a bunch of college bats going, consecutively? Did anything really kind of jump out to you from a scouting standpoint?
To me, it was sort of the validation of our prep baseball as well as all the other mock drafts. You see all the mocks and you see 3 high school players from the Pacific Northwest mocked to the first round. And that just doesn't happen around here, right? Mm-hmm. So you go into the draft a little tentative, like, oh, is that really going to happen? But to see Xavier, to see Cruz, to see Slater all picked within the first 37 picks of the draft, really, really exciting, really validating, I guess, for baseball up here in the area.
Sure. And you bring up a good point, too, just in terms of the mock drafts and kind of the unpredictability of the baseball draft, right? So when you're involved a lot with these type of evaluations or draft mocks and different things like that, you have a sense of signability, leverage, different factors that play into it. For your more common fan who maybe isn't as wired into the baseball side of it, it's just a completely different draft from what you might see with the NFL or with the MLB, that are basically dictated a lot by talent, right? The best players typically get drafted first, and then whatever your signing bonus or your slot bonus is for that particular pick, it's pretty automatic. And with baseball, especially with those top 10 picks, those first 10 rounds and your bonus pool, there's a ton of accounting that goes into it. There's a ton of mixing and matching with, your first pick being maybe a value pick where you save money, and then your second pick might be a younger guy or a high school guy that has more leverage, and then you have to pay more, or vice versa. And right off the bat, we saw a little bit of that with Eli Willits going first, and then Tyler Bremner from UCSB going second. Not that those guys weren't going to get drafted, but the last few weeks, everyone was high on Cade Anderson from LSU, who falls third to the Mariners. Liam Doyle obviously had a ton of momentum out of Tennessee. And then all of a sudden you have players available at, 3, you had Ethan Holiday at 4, and then down to 5 that basically no one thought would be available. And it just has this mass effect on the rest of the draft and how it plays out. So basically within the first 2 picks, all of your mock drafts are pretty much debunked at that point, and all of those top players are still remain. It just becomes a bit of a sliding scale on where they ultimately end up. And speaking to, Pacific Northwest, obviously a lot of Mariners fans out here, I don't think anyone anticipated Cade Anderson at 3 going into that draft. And obviously then he kind of falls into your lap, and it's a pretty easy pick from there, and you save money on it. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but for people that maybe aren't as familiar with the draft and the unpredictability of it, that's a really good microcosm of how things can shake out and have a lasting impact on what we see in those later rounds. But obviously, Dylan, I know you're a Mariners fan. I would hope that you're pretty excited about, not just that pick, but then what happened, throughout the rest of the draft as well.
Sure. I mean, hard not to get excited about Kate Anderson, right? Thought of by most people as the top arm, maybe the top player in the draft, and getting him just such a steal. I mean, the Mariners really weren't even supposed to have the third pick. They sort of defied the odds and got that to begin with, and then defied the odds again and getting the top player. So yeah, really exciting there. In terms of, you're talking about the signability and kind of the overslot versus underslot deals, just that, bringing it back to the Pacific Northwest guys, that's just kind of another reason that stood out to me in terms of why it was so cool to see 3 guys from the Pacific Northwest out of high school go in the first round, right? You talk about those high school players. A lot of times they'll demand overslot money, so getting paid more than what that slot is projected to be. Because if they don't get paid more money, they'll just go to school, right? And we saw that maybe that might be potentially happening for a couple of the guys drafted later in the later rounds. But the fact that our Pacific Northwest guys got taken that early, likely overslot deals, just goes to show how much value they carry.
Definitely. And then within those picks in the top 10 rounds, don't quote me on the exact percentage, but it's like an over 90% rate that guys ultimately sign if they're taken in those top 10 picks. So again, we don't know the numbers. We don't know the conversations. We don't know what type of deals are happening prior to the pick and after the pick. It's just safe to assume that all of those guys drafted early are ultimately going to sign and most likely forego their college eligibility. But we'll dive into that, one at a time right now, and we will kick things off with the 21st overall pick in the draft from Mount Vernon High School, Xavier Nyans. With Xavier specifically, there's a long track record of experience here and evaluations that go all the way back to when he was 13 years old. Sent us a very early DM when we had just started events in Washington, asking if it was okay for him to come to a workout at Bannerwood because he was younger than the grad classes that we had on the event information. So right out of the gate, we see Xavier around that 13-year-old mark, and he comes out and just looks extremely polished, extremely mature at that age. Totally different physically. This was not the type of guy that kind of hits a maturation or hits a growth spurt at like 13 or 14 and shoots up and just overpowers everyone. His skill set, his actions, his feel for the game was much more polished. And then the physical stuff, which we'll talk about later, slowly developed at a really appropriate and beneficial rate. But early on, get to see a kid at 13, love the way he hits. He's catching, he's playing shortstop, he's pitching, he's basically doing everything on the diamond. We get the chance to take him to Georgia with the first ever junior future games team that we have. And he's extremely competitive, just really good at bats, not afraid of velocity. Everyone in the event is older than him, and he just goes out and has a phenomenal event and really kind of cements himself early on as a player to know, not just in the state and in that class, but just nationally with what he was capable of doing from a hitting standpoint. And then slowly but surely, the strength comes in, the size comes in, he starts throwing harder, he starts running faster, comes off the board. He's an early commitment to Oregon State before all the recruiting rules changed. I want to say it was maybe summer of 8th grade, fall of 9th grade. So it was an early commitment at the time, but this is a kid that grew up in the Pacific Northwest, saw the Beavers win a bunch of national championships, saw all the premier guys come through when he was kind of growing in the game himself. So it was just a really easy fit. And I think it was one of those times where like an early commitment obviously made a ton of sense. It was kind of the right situation. And ultimately he gets into those early high school years, the physicality takes off. All of a sudden that high contact rate, the pure left-handed swing adds a ton of power, both raw power in like a BP setting and then in-game power going, whether it's backside, pull side, up the middle, gap to gap. Everything he hits in the air has authority. He's bouncing around a little bit on defense, mostly shortstop. We've seen him on the bump. He's a multiple participant in area codes. He made the upper class team as an underclassman and had one of the breakout summers his sophomore year at area codes. And I think it was probably that particular performance that kind of pushed him into that first round consideration and one of the premier bats in the class. And obviously, if you followed the draft, you saw a bunch of high school guys kind of go really early in that top half of the first round. big run on high school shortstops. And then with Xavier, he was probably one of the more impactful high school bats available, especially from the left side, with the power potential and what he was able to do from a defensive standpoint, whether you shift him to third, keep him at short, whether you move him to a corner outfield spot. It's plus arm strength. We've seen him 94, 95 on the bump. We've seen him low 90s from the infield and the outfield. He's a sub-7 runner. He runs a 6'7 to a 6'8. So athletically, he's going to be able to plug into a lot of different spots. And it was right around that, sophomore, junior year where things really took off. And that brings us to senior year, basically his draft year and his last audition before teams are on the clock deciding what they want to do with him. And I'll turn it over to you, Dylan, because I know you had multiple looks senior year. And that's important because you got to see him early in tough conditions, in the cold, under the lights, facing, a low to mid-90s fastball from Mason Pike, which we'll talk about later. And then you get to see him put the exclamation point on his high school career, bring home a state championship, and obviously is a key component of that whole run with Mount Vernon. So give us just your takeaways from that kind of senior year that you got to witness from start to finish from Xavier.
Yeah, really kind of fun experience to thinking about bookending his senior year, right? Getting to see his first game of the year with Mount Vernon and then the last game when they ended up winning the 3A state championship. Really consistent approach from Xavier that I saw over the 3 or 4 looks throughout the year. Again, like you said, first time in Everett in kind of the wet, rainy conditions, then in Vancouver at the Baseball-ism tournament that we covered as prep baseball, and then to finish in Yakima. It's a really patient, selective approach, right? He doesn't expand the zone at all. I think the final tally was he had 31 hits his senior year and 46 walks. So just an insane ratio, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody in the area knows how potent of a bat he is. They're not going to pitch to him, but he took his walks. That's something we saw on the summer circuit as well last summer, and really carried that over into the spring. As far as the overall report at the plate, it's plus power over hit to this point, plus bat speed. Again, you said the ability to lift to all fields really stands out. We saw that at the playoffs last year and again this year. Currently a shortstop. We'll see if he sticks there. It looks like a move to the corner is likely, whether it's third base or maybe even a corner outfield spot down the line. I'm going to be really curious to see how he fits into the Astros organization specifically. Like you said, an interesting fit, drafted 21st with the 21st pick in the first round. Houston obviously has a really great track record of developing hitters, whether it's Alex Bregman, Jeremy Pena, guys like that in recent years. So really curious to see what they do with Xavier, but really strong impression start to finish, really selective approach, really great overall offensive profile that I saw in his career.
Yeah, and I think it was a lot of pressure offensively kind of to start the year. And I think draftitis is a thing. I'm not saying it was specific to Xavier. I think with just guys in general, there is a tougher component to balancing out your approach in game and staying in the moment, keeping things simple versus understanding that guys want to see the tools, guys want to see what you're capable of, and just finding that balance back and forth of staying within yourself and then being aggressive in select moments is definitely difficult to do. And when you're sitting back and you're in the seats or you're in the bleachers, it's a lot easier to kind of look at it and make judgments and assess and things like that. It's a really tough spot for young hitters to be in. And ultimately, I think there was some back and forth from the industry on the bat during the spring, which is common. It's one of the toughest pieces of baseball to evaluate, and it's the easiest thing to nitpick because you can look at statistics, you can look at batting average or walks and strikeouts and try to poke holes in guys and things like that. I think for the Astros, and I'm not speaking with any inside information or things like that, it seems like there's just a point where you have to really be honest with the upside, the potential, and what someone's ceiling might be. And when you get to 21st overall in the draft and you have a young left-handed high school bat whose upside is probably 30 to 40 home runs at the big league level, I think that's just something you have to be comfortable grabbing at that point, right? And we've seen glimpses of the hit tool being more advanced, and then we've seen some times where every hitter is going to have some rough patches here and there. Ultimately, you talked about the approach. I do think it's more selective than passive, and I think that's an important distinction. I don't think he's passive. I think he's selective. And ultimately, as you climb the ladder, as you get into pro ball, strike zone gets smaller. Obviously, the pitching and guys get better and the stuff gets tougher to square up. But for what Xavier does in terms of pitch recognition, his approach, how cued in he is to kind of what he's looking for, I think that could help him down the road. It might not necessarily show benefits in high school ball sometimes because you're just dealing with different factors, right? It's a bigger strike zone. It's a different type of game than the pro game, obviously. I think when he has some guys that throw in the mid to upper 90s and they start challenging him with that, I think his skill set is really going to show up in that type of setting. And then again, you talk about the athleticism on defense, what he's capable of doing. It's not like you're just taking a bat and kind of hiding him on the diamond. He's a baseball junkie. This kid has been living and breathing baseball for pretty much his entire life. He's gonna figure something out on defense, and there's a good chance I think he becomes an above average defender wherever he ends up, just because of the acumen, right? Like he moves really well. He filled out his body and his frame at a controlled pace. So his defensive actions never took a hit. He never got too bulky. He never got stiff. He can move really well from the floor up with his hips, and just everything he does is really smooth. I think sometimes we overlook the defensive aspect of it and just kind of label him as a bat first guy. I think he's going to really surprise people from the defensive side of things when you get him into a pro system and he can kind of just be himself out there and not worry about the draft over his head anymore or different things of that nature. Like that part's done. And now he just gets to go play, and he just strikes me as the kid that's 15 minutes for early work and he's in the cages after practice or, at the facility by the time everyone leaves. So obviously with the history we have with him between junior future games, the high school season, interacting with him at the All-American game, we know about those things. I'm sure there's a lot of other high school guys that are probably similar that we just don't have that relationship or that interaction as well. But just knowing Xavier now, getting to see it firsthand, the makeup, and all those other things that really matter when you become a professional at 18 and no one is there to hold your hand. I just think he's really going to excel, under those circumstances, and it's going to be really exciting to watch.
So the next pick out of the Pacific Northwest, drafted 25th overall in the first round by the San Diego Padres, was left-handed pitcher Cruz Schoolcraft. Schoolcraft's big, tall, 6'8" lefty out of Sunset High School in the Portland area. We had multiple looks at Cruz this spring. Shooter Hunt, our VP of scouting, got multiple looks at him there in his backyard. Shooter's obviously from the Portland area. And then Dan, you saw him as, I guess, his last high school outing in the state championship for Sunset. What the Padres are getting, a really polished, overpowering lefty, imposing 6'8" frame, right? Fastball up into the mid to upper 90s. I think we've seen him up to 97 miles an hour. Again, one of those guys like Xavier where we saw him early, we saw him really young, and kind of got to see the maturation and development of the skill set year over year, and turned into an absolute beast by the end of his high school career, right? He was a 2-time Prep Baseball Oregon Player of the Year in his junior and senior seasons, dominated on both sides of the ball, hit double-digit home runs at the plate from the left side, played a sound first base, and then just absolutely carved high school competition on the mound. So Dan, in terms of what you see from Cruz and what the Padres are getting, what do you see out of Schoolcraft?
I'll back it up just a little bit, right? Because it's a similar type of trajectory and experience that we had with Xavier, who we previously talked about, where had the chance to see Cruz at an early workout right out of COVID in 2020 as a super young, up and coming left-handed hitter, first baseman. Comes to junior future games, as a 14-year-old, and is starting to creep into the low 80s with his fastball. Obviously has a really polished approach to his game, nice, easy arm action. You can see the length in the frame and the projectability at a young age. And then similar to Xavier, right around that freshman, sophomore year in the timeline, hits a growth spurt, makes a big velo jump. All of a sudden, you got a rising sophomore that's a left-handed pitcher sitting in the low 90s pretty comfortably, does not have a high effort delivery, just kind of flows, works downhill, and allows his arm to just accelerate late. And then the gains and the jumps in velocity just continue, right? So all of a sudden now you've got mid 90s velocity. You're seeing 93, 94, 95, gets up to 96, 97 on our looks this spring. And just from a tools standpoint, right, you have a high school left-handed pitcher that can run his fastball up to 97. That's a very difficult thing to find, regardless of year, regardless of part of the country. Like that in and of itself is just very rare. And obviously his background, his makeup, and his work ethic is off the charts. This is a kid that lives and breathes baseball pretty much 24/7. He's got tremendous arm care routines. His strength and conditioning is all baseball specific. He is all in all the time with the baseball side of it, with the development, with anything he does in his daily routine. It's all geared towards baseball. And it's probably what allowed him to just hit this ceiling as, you know, a left-handed pitcher, first baseman. By the time he's a junior, like you said, he's dominating high school baseball, just video game type numbers from a pitching standpoint with strikes. I think that's probably what separated him on draft day is, I mean, gaudy strikeout numbers, which you generally see from draft eligible high school pitchers, but just minuscule walks, like just attack the zone, whether it was a heavy fastball, whether it was a heavy changeup. I think obviously there's some development that will happen from the breaking ball standpoint, whether he sticks with the slider, whether it develops into a curveball, like that remains to be seen. With modern player development now and how organizations are developing their pitchers and tweaking things with their arms, I would venture to guess that the Padres see something that they can work with. They like the canvas, they like the foundation, they like what the ceiling could be. And given his physicality, his track record of throwing strikes in the zone, and where he can still get to as a 6'8" lefty, again, it's just tough to find. It's really tough to find this type of upside with a prep left-handed pitcher. And obviously that's probably what cemented him as the 25th overall pick. And again, similar to Xavier, goes out as a state champion, right? So wire to wire, he did have a reclass in there where he was a 2026 grad for a stretch of time, bumped into the 2025 class. I'm not 1,000% sure on age as of draft day, so I'm not going to worry about that, but age appropriate to say the least. And to go all in on the high school side of it as well, commit to the team, commit to win a state championship, and to be an integral part of that journey for him and his teammates and obviously the community. To be there was a very cool moment, and you could just sense it, you know, down the stretch as the game was getting tight. You know, Cruz had pitches that he could throw. He threw in the semis getting into the state championship game, but because of his pitch count, he had the ability to come back in for a lower number of pitches. I think it was like he had like a 30 pitch limit. So he goes out there for the last inning, throws in the low 90s, gets the save for the state championship, and just takes it home for Sunset. So very cool moment, not just from the draft side of it, but just to win the last game of your high school season is pretty impressive. And not a lot of guys have the chance to do that. And then also, for an exclamation point, be a first round draft pick. So banner year, you know, for Cruz. And again, tying it into the whole Pacific Northwest, just seeing some exciting high school prospects with some big time tools that warrants them being, you know, picked in the 20s of the MLB draft. Finishing up the run of first round high school selections from the Pacific Northwest, we have Slater DeBrun going in the comp round A, 37th overall to the Baltimore Orioles. Slater is no stranger to prep baseball or our events and showcases. He's a guy that really burst onto the scene as a sophomore, had a great performance at our Oregon Top Prospect event at Milwaukee High School, and then just a few weeks later exploded onto the scene with a breakout performance at the Future Games in 2023 with the Team Pacific Northwest. Shortly after, his recruiting really kind of took off, and he was already a known commodity going into the event, and then ultimately was a Vanderbilt commit in high school. So Vanderbilt is historically a tough commitment to sign players away from. Obviously, going 37th overall kind of changes that dynamic a little bit. So we'll see how things shake out with the slot bonus and the money that kind of gets involved in this one. If you look at the Orioles and what they did with their picks on this particular draft, they had 4 picks in the top 37. They grabbed 3 college bats, leading up to their selection of Slater. So it almost seems like there was a little bit of anticipation to potentially save some money early on the college guys, and then maybe go with an overslot deal on a high upside high upside prep bat like Slater. And getting into that, Dylan, I know you had a look at Slater coming into this year in the preseason, caught him at an indoor workout. Obviously in that setting, with his speed, again, he's a plus runner, probably a plus runner in that 6'4", 6'5" range at his absolute best. Center field profile, left in terms of hit and throw. Don't necessarily get to see all of those components indoors in a cage, but just give us like a quick little recap of how he stacked up, not just physically, but comparing him to these other guys that were indoors. We don't need to go kind of naming all of them or breaking them down, but there was a lot of really talented players there. What kind of stood out the most for you with Slater? Because I know this was your first look at him in person.
It was the polish in the BP rounds, right? When you're looking at a player in an indoor setting, it's BP is what you're looking at from a position player perspective. And this guy did not miss a barrel. Let me tell you, through a couple of rounds of BP, it was barrel, back of the cage every time. And like you said, the speed is the carrying tool here. The bat looks to be average right now. We'll see how it develops, but the speed, the defense is something that teams, the Orioles in this case, will be dreaming on. Really exciting profile. Again, it's 5'11", plus speed. A lot of comps to a couple other guys drafted in recent years in Corbin Carroll and Slade Caldwell, where you can kind of see the proof and concept a little bit of maybe those players that are a little bit more of an average frame, but just otherworldly athleticism that carries the rest of their game.
Yeah, and one thing you talked about, I'll dive into this a little bit. When we talk about like an average hitter, everything we're relating to these guys from the scouting standpoint, we're saying average for the pro level. Obviously, when he's at the high school level, he's at the prep level, everything he does is exceptional and well above average. An average MLB hitter or a 50 grade hitter is roughly carrying like a 260 batting average, last I checked. So, you're projecting out for the hit tool to be an average hit tool around a 260 average. And then I would say speed-wise, he's probably a 70 grade type guy in terms of his raw time, his hard 90 plus his 60 time probably puts him in that 70 range. And then there might be some varying opinions on the power, not in terms of just raw power, but game power and how often he can get to it. I think during his rise in like that sophomore year, especially, biggest thing he had going for himself was he really tapped into power at the right times. Had a really good future games. I think he had a 4-hit performance across 3 games, hit a walk-off home run in our second game that just brought everyone to their feet and really put everything into perspective in terms of what this bat and what this athlete is capable of when it all clicks. And to your point, carrying tools and things you can rely on to still be there 2, 3, 4 years down the road. It's tough to find a lot of guys that have multiple carrying tools at an above average projection. So the speed, the fact that you can probably keep him in center long term, which is a much more valuable defensive position, the fact that he's a left-handed bat helps. I think early on, this was a guy that hit for more contact intentionally, probably didn't give too much thought to lifting the ball, getting it in the air, hitting home runs, because when you're a left-handed bat that can make contact and run like him, you're going to get on base all the time. You're going to be a high average guy, and it can be easy to really just kind of focus on that as you're having success at a young level. So I'll give Slater credit for not reinventing himself offensively, but for evolving offensively to give that offensive profile a little bit more potential and a little bit more projection. Obviously, again, another guy, 3 guys we've talked about, all win a state championship. So Slater is the 3rd guy, first-round pick, Summit High School, 5A Oregon state champs. Pretty cool arc for those guys to, again, tie it all together with not just individual accolades and hype and then deliver on draft, but prior to, be a good teammate, be a good leader on the field, and really show the competitiveness and the desire to prioritize winning between the lines. When it's very easy to see dollar signs at the end of the tunnel and think about getting paid and be extra cautious, not put yourself out there. All these guys have probably played through some rolled ankles, some hamstrings. Like they're putting their potential paycheck on the line for their high school team. And I think that says a lot about the character of these guys, also the competitiveness of the area with the Pacific Northwest and guys that aren't afraid to compete. They value their teammates, they value their relationships, and they value what they're able to do. So we saw it with the first 2 picks. We see it with Slater again, first-round guys that are also state champions. So just a cool dynamic that this area had going for itself leading into this draft. But again, Slater was a Team USA guy as a senior, had a great type of end to his high school trajectory with area codes, making Team USA. And really at that point, he's a known commodity. We saw projections everywhere from like the early teens into the late 20s and a little bit of variance in that slot for where he was projected to go, but ultimately ends up as a first-round pick out of high school. And again, we'll see how the conversations go with signability and different things like that. But plus athlete, tons of bat speed, tons of raw speed, and with his run tool, really a dynamo on the baseball field. That'll be a lot of fun to watch in the years to come.
So switching gears, moving past our 3 first-round picks out of the Pacific Northwest, we did have 3 more Pacific Northwest players drafted out of high school in the later rounds of this year's MLB Draft, in addition to a bunch of other college players with some PNW roots, so college players that played their high school ball in the Pacific Northwest. Did have some of those guys go in some of the middle rounds. We'll circle back on them and talk about them later on. But want to get to these high school guys first. And the first player of this group of 3 drafted in the 11th round, 339th overall, was River Hamilton, right-handed pitcher out of Sam Barlow High School. Dan, you've seen River a bit more than myself, a bit more familiar with his overall game. What do you see out of Hamilton?
Coming into this draft, I think there was a lot of speculation on what type of ceiling River could get to, or what his potential might be in terms of how high he could get drafted and things like that. And backtracking a little bit, this area has specifically had Mick Abel, who made it up to the show this year, Noble Meyer, who was the 10th overall pick. We had J.R. Ritchie, who's a first-round pick out of Bainbridge, and just pitched the future games. Yeah, Jackson Cox from Tudor Lake, who was a second-round pick. River was in that same category of arm early on. There was there were some ebbs and flows to the health and kind of consistently getting innings that happened throughout the course of his high school year. Not sure where he's at right now physically in terms of availability or what he's doing, but we did get some quality looks in the high school season when he was ramped up, when he was at 100%. Shoot a Hunt especially was very locked in on him when he had the chance to get out and see him. And ultimately, there's a lot of upside here. There's a lot of things to like. Prep right-handed pitchers specifically are a riskier demographic. That's not specific to River. That's just looking at historically the draft picks that are high school right-handed pitchers, the probability of them getting to the big leagues. It's just a volatile group, mainly because they typically throw very hard, right? If you're a high school right-handed pitcher and you're getting looked at early in the draft, there's a chance you have premium velocity. And with that premium velocity, there just comes risk. And it doesn't matter how polished you are, what your mechanics look like. Everything can be squeaky clean. There's just risk involved. That being said, I think in the modern day baseball world, I think organizations are less worried about that now. I mean, I hate to see it. A lot of guys get hurt, though. And even in the pro level, in minor league ball, in pro ball, guys get hurt. And the rehab protocols, these trainers, the team docs, I just feel like organizations feel much more confident about getting a guy back to 100%. And when River's at 100%, it's electric stuff, sizzling fastball up to 95, 96, probably slider over a curveball right now, with the slider having a chance to be a plus pitch. When you have 2 breaking balls, a mid-90s fastball, you don't need to flash the changeup very often. So it's tough to kind of grade the changeup right now. But you're looking at a guy that has a starter profile with a 6'4", 6'5" frame, and ultimately a pretty clean delivery with some sustainable effort. He's not max effort. He's not overexerting himself. It's controlled, it's clean, it's loose, it's whippy. It's really all the things you would want in a projectable high school arm. This part of the draft, I think, kind of makes sense for him, and be curious to see what he ultimately does potentially end up signing for, because he does have an LSU commitment, right? And you talked about Cruz Schoolcraft in Tennessee earlier. LSU is probably is in that upper echelon right now in terms of recruiting, success on the field, guys getting drafted. Like, they've got a really good thing going for him right now. So he's probably got an interesting decision on getting into an organization, getting with those player development groups, working with their trainers, versus going to one of the premier college baseball factories in the entire country right now. So be interesting to see how it plays out. I don't have any thoughts or inclinations either way for where he ultimately ends up. But again, really talented high school arm. I think wherever his next step is, he's got a chance to really kind of make some jumps and make some gains quickly. And it's an incredibly high ceiling for, a right-handed pitcher as he continues to grow and develop.
So selected immediately after River Hamilton in the 11th round, pick 340 of this year's draft, was Ballard High School's Truett Madonna, 6'3" catcher with a commitment to UCLA, selected in this draft by the San Diego Padres. So should he choose to sign, he'll join Cruz Schoolcraft as a part of that high school draft class for the Padres. Truett saw him in Yakima this summer at the WIAA state championships with Ballard, where we saw him in a semifinal matchup. Really impressed with his overall skill set. Very, very polished hitter from the right side. I remarked to one of our other Pred Baseball scouts, he looks like a professional level hitter already, right? He stays really connected in the lower half. Really great barrel control, drove balls all weekend long to the pull side and to the big part of the yard. And kind of carried that momentum from the spring into the MLB Draft League, where he exploded and really continued to build his momentum in what resulted to a draft in the 11th round. Dan, what do you like about Madonna?
I'm going to backtrack a little bit for Truett specifically and reference a conversation I had with his head coach, Doug Montgomery. I want to say it was around maybe like the fall of Truett's sophomore year. We were doing some rankings updates. We had our updated list that were out there being promoted, and Doug had reached out. We had chatted before on various things. Like, he's always been really good about sending us information on like Metro League stuff or stats and the All-Star games and things like that. So, always appreciated Doug for helping us out. And he had just said that he felt that we were undervaluing Truett a little bit, and that he was in the same tier and the same echelon as some of the guys that we had higher up in the rankings. And it was a very cordial, very professional conversation. It was nothing malicious or, disrespectful in terms of how our list looked or what we were doing. And I appreciated his candor for it. And obviously fast forward 2 years now, and not only was he beyond correct, but we were way off, right? Early on, didn't have a ton of looks, especially offensively. And it was right around his junior year, especially when we saw him in the state playoffs, had a chance to see him at Bannerwood. That summer he goes to area codes, and then we had multiple looks senior year, and really every look, things just got better. They got more explosive. He ultimately ends up committing to UCLA, and it was oh boy, yes, Doug was spot on. We were low on him at the time, and thankfully I think we kind of caught up late, kind of got him to a more appropriate place leading into his senior year. But this is a guy I wish we would have hyped up a little bit more heading into the draft, because all the precursors were there for a high school guy. Obviously, catching is a little bit more difficult. It's a position that usually requires a lot of patience and a lot of time to get through the minor leagues, so much so that you'll see organizations take a super talented hitter, move him off of catcher, put him in a different position, because they don't want to slow his bat down from developing and getting to the big leagues. So the catching component makes it a little bit tricky from an offensive standpoint in terms of bat speed, swing path. his ability to get the ball into the air at a high velocity. Everything he hits hard in the air is with authority, right? And it's not just that the balls are hard hit, but they have backspin. They have true ball flight. He doesn't turn it over or slice it. So everything that we've seen him square up kind of showcases an efficient swing path, bat speed, strength, all the things that really project well to not just hitting for a quality average, but hitting for power when it actually matters in game. And then obviously senior year explodes with a high volume of home runs and really kind of puts a exclamation point on what he's capable of offensively. Runs above average, especially for his size. The frame can still get stronger. He's not tapped out physically. I think he'll be able to add more weight and strength and still continue to be a good athlete. So interesting with the dynamic of signability, having the UCLA commitment, typically a tough program, again, to sign guys away from. But it's like you said, 11th round pick. There's some money that they can use to kind of lock him up, and we'll see how it goes in terms of what the next step for Truitt is. But he's a guy that really had a great senior year, especially. I think hopefully the draft league was, again, beneficial for him when some guys aren't playing. When he takes the risk, goes out to the draft league on the East Coast as a high school kid, facing all college arms and all guys that are older than him, and performs really well. That's not easy to do. Takes some toughness and physical ability to do that and to be successful with it. So, kudos to Truitt. Obviously, kudos to Doug for calling this a couple years back. And just a really cool story and a really cool player arc to kind of see come out of the Pacific Northwest with Truitt as he finishes up his senior year.
So the final high school player drafted in this year's MLB Draft is two-way player, right-handed pitcher, infielder Mason Pike. Pike, out of Puyallup High School and Oregon State commit, was drafted in the 19th round by the Washington Nationals, and looks to be most likely, and this is just speculation here, but the most likely guy to make it to campus, drafted in the late round, despite maybe a second or third round mock kind of ideal spot for him. So we'll see what that entails. As of this recording, no decision has been made yet, one way or the other. But really, really fantastic talent in Mason Pike, two-time Prep Baseball Washington Player of the Year for Puyallup, one of the best teams in the area and one of the best teams in the country for multiple years now. Dan, what do you see from Pike, specifically from the pitching side in terms of the last couple of years in his high school career, and then how that can kind of develop moving forward?
I think it's an interesting eval on the pitching side of it because, to my knowledge, he did not go full-fledged starting pitcher until his junior year. And obviously, this is a guy that would make some relief appearances, come in and close, and do some things out of the bullpen and be super talented. But as far as I know, when he kicked off junior year was his first experience as a starter and in that capacity. And then over the last 2 years, he was as consistent and as dominant as any arm that we've seen or evaluated in the area over that span of time. Again, two-time Player of the Year, video game-like numbers on the mound while continuing to be an impact bat from the left side and playing and staying in the lineup every day. So just tremendous feel for his body control, his mechanics, the way he moves down the mound is incredibly fluid with a ton of adjustability and control of the baseball. And I think we're getting away from this concept of like repeating your delivery because it doesn't really necessarily work that way. Like your body can't physically do the same thing over and over again. It can get close, but there's some uniqueness to basically every pitch and every release point and every time you kind of go through your throwing motion. His ability to stay in control of the baseball, command multiple pitches, both from the windup, from the stretch, at a high velocity, has been exceptional to watch. In my estimation, I saw him as a pitcher in this upcoming draft, and that's not to take anything away from his offensive potential. I'm just all in on the pitching side of it based on what I've seen, right? And we've had his velocity up to 96, 97 across multiple looks. We saw 97 this spring. We had guys in Cary, North Carolina at USA trials that had him 94 to 96 with a 2,800 RPM fastball and a slider at 85, 87. Okay, and this is also a guy that has flirted with a sinker He doesn't need the changeup often. I think he's flashed a plus changeup at time. So you're talking about mid-90s velocity, potentially multiple fastballs with different shapes, at least an average, potentially above average slider, and a developing changeup. I just thought this was the type of arm that would be very well equipped for the new age of pitching development. We're not seeing a ton of obsession with 6'4", 6'5" guys throwing downhill anymore. Organizations are more open-minded to an undersized or shorter prep pitcher. They can get big carry at the top of the zone. They have a lower release slot, a flatter vertical approach angle. Just felt like he checked a lot of those boxes and was going to be an arm that, probably came off the board maybe in rounds 3 through 5. Again, we don't know what the conversations were like. We don't know what the price was or the signing bonus talks or anything of that nature. So who knows how things really kind of shook out. Ultimately, he comes off the board in the 19th round. Seems like he would be more likely to get to campus in that scenario. And in which case, there's probably a good likelihood that he gets some two-way chances, right? In pro ball, it's just very difficult to do both. It's a lot more possible at the college level. Even at a program as good as Oregon State, it's more possible or more likely, I should say, to impact the game in multiple ways. So it'd be really interesting to see not just what happens over the next few weeks in terms of where he ends up, but also if he gets to a campus, what kind of role he gets put into early on, how he develops, and that career arc will be extremely exciting to watch if it does take place at a national powerhouse like Oregon State.
So switching gears here away from our 6 Pacific Northwest players who were drafted out of high school in this year's MLB Draft, we also had 11 players that were drafted out of college that played their high school baseball in Washington and Oregon. So Dan, why don't you take us through a few of your favorites on the college side in terms of guys that played their high school ball here in the Pacific Northwest?
So we'll just kind of go in random order here, but starting off with Danny Dickinson from LSU, just became an NCAA national champion, goes in the 6th round at pick 185 to the Brewers. He was a guy that did a couple showcases early on, coming through the high school ranks. And then his senior year, we had multiple looks at during the spring in the high school season. And then also he was in the state semis and then got into a consolation game out in Geisa Stadium in 2023 when we were watching state playoff action then. So again, he started off at Utah Valley, was a highly successful freshman year, turned that into a really great sophomore year, jumped into the portal, lands at LSU, finishes as a national champion, and goes in the 6th round. Another 6th round pick be Nelson Keljo from Jesuit High School in Portland, goes to Oregon State, starts for the Beavers, initially comes out of the pen in kind of a relief role with a mid-90s fastball, ultimately ends up getting quite a few starts to finish up his college career. He was our number 1 player in the high school rankings for the 2022 class when he graduated. He's a really exciting, high-intensity, hard-throwing left-handed arm to keep an eye on. Bouncing back over to Washington, got right-handed pitcher Peyton Graham out of Gonzaga, goes in the 7th round to the Cardinals. This was a guy, we never had him at any workouts, but I did get the chance to see him pitch as a senior during the high school season. He was a two-way star for Kamiakin, just athletically could do it all, multi-sport guy, gets to Gonzaga and ultimately shines as a PO. Got hurt this season and missed some time, unfortunately. Prior to his injury, reports that he was up to 96, 97, 98 with the fastball and kind of has a power arsenal. So given where he got drafted, considering the injury, you got to know that some teams really liked the stuff and just the potential of that arm for him to go in the 7th round. So really, really cool pick to see Peyton Graham get selected there. Continuing on, Wilson Weber, the 12th round pick, guy we got to see at a workout from Barlow High School in Oregon. And then we were following him pretty tightly during his senior year. We were at a couple games where he had some scouts giving him some looks as well. Ultimately gets to campus with Oregon State and really kind of was patient with his development. Didn't see a ton of time early on. Was a little bit more of like a defensive first type of catcher. By the time he's a senior, he's starting games in Omaha in the middle of the lineup. So had a productive year offensively, hit double-digit home runs, and has an absolute cannon of an arm behind the dish at catcher. So, he'll get the chance to get into pro ball now after being selected by the Marlins. Another backstop, Tyler Howard, originally from Skyview, Washington, then was selected out of Portland in the 11th round to the Guardians. He's a guy that came to future games in 2020 as we were kind of slowly coming out of COVID and the baseball world was getting back up to speed. He was at the 2020 Future Games, which was live streamed. No college coaches could attend. And that roster was pretty stacked with guys like Noble Meyer, Sebastian David, Grant Cunningham, just to name a few. So really dependable backstop, good catch and throw skills, more of a contact, gap-to-gap type offensive player, but he goes in the 11th round. And then Cannon Reeder, another Oregon State Beaver. And obviously when you are a team like Oregon State and you've got high-profile guys like Iva Arquette, Gavin Turley, guys that are getting picked in the top of the draft, you ultimately see a lot of guys get selected just because of all the looks that the team ends up getting. So Cannon Reeder goes in the 18th round at 533 overall to the Pirates. Came to a pro case during his high school days with us, posted some crazy numbers, 6'3" runner, 90 miles an hour from the outfield, really good defense, probably has a chance to stick in center long-term, and put it together offensively this year for the Beavers. So he was our number 3 player in the 2022 class at the time of graduation. And then just a couple more guys to finish up with here, both backstops and dependable catchers from the Pacific Northwest. Justin Stransky, who ended up at Lower Columbia and then made his way to Fresno State, and Will Cresswell, who got drafted out of Washington State. Stransky goes in the 10th round to the Cubs at 301 overall, and Cresswell goes in the 18th round to the Blue Jays. 2 guys that could always catch and throw, really good on defense, more contact-oriented at the high school level with their offensive approach. They get to college, they get the experience, they get in the weight room, they bulk up, they get stronger. And, college catchers, guys that can receive and catch and throw, are always in demand. So overall, from top to bottom, the college crop of guys, we didn't mention all of them in our breakdown, but we'll post all of them, for everyone to see. Really some cool trajectories and some cool career arcs from start to finish with where they were at in high school, whether they went JUCO route first and then to a 4-year, or whether they went to a more prominent program right out of the gate. Just a lot of guys that had to put in work, had to kind of wait for their opportunities later on in their career, will ultimately get the chance to play professional baseball through the college ranks.
So that'll wrap up our discussion of the 2025 Major League Baseball draft in relation to the Pacific Northwest. Again, big congratulations to all 17 of these guys, 6 high school players and 11 guys drafted out of college. Really a remarkable year for the Pacific Northwest. We'll see if we get that many people drafted in years to come. Really excited to see the future of baseball in the Pacific Northwest, and excited to see what this 2026 class has to offer next year.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. As usual, please like, subscribe, and share to the Rain Delay podcast on YouTube as we look to grow the channel and continue to produce more content for you. Until then, we've got a couple more events to do for the rest of the summer. Be on the lookout for some future games content, as well as some content from our upcoming Pacific Northwest State games at the end of July. Dylan, thanks again for jumping on with us. Appreciate all your insight. We'll see everyone down the road.